Hi everybody, this is Steve Doyle, Logik Realty, and this is the second training that we're kind of doing on the listing presentation, so just bear with me for a second here, and I'm going to share my screen, which is a little different than what we did last time, but we'll take it from the top here just real quick. So the goal here was to kind of go through the Fearless Agent listing presentation, which to me has been great when I meet with clients looking to sell their homes. It gives you a very professional look, and to be able to present like a memorized presentation to your client that's kind of geared up towards selling you as the product. You as the agent, that's going to be key to helping the client sell their home for top dollar, and hopefully to a buyer for more than what it's worth if the seller will go along with the plan, and blow away your competition in the process. So we have some slides for the listing presentation, and we went over these last time. So there's an introduction. You will take the client through some questions. The questions really are what's geared up towards getting the client to fall in love with you. Not about necessarily rapport building, but more about them just getting the feeling that you are definitely a professional, that you're asking them the right questions. You super care about their outcome in this process, and it's not about you, me, and my, and all those other crazy things, right? So you go through the questions, tour the property, talk about some marketing, then give them the option to make the most important decision, and that's to use you, a Logik agent. And then after that, you talk about pricing, and more important than just picking a price is to pick a price that's guaranteed to make sure they're not leaving any money on the table. And at the end of that, you can go over what the results are going to be, conservative plan, and if they're all on board with that, then you go ahead and list their home. So we went over the introduction, which is about the expired list. The goal of that is to get their attention right away. You never want to be presenting to your client in a situation where they're kind of off in la-la land or not super focused, so you're trying to right off the bat get their attention and let them know what's at stake. And then once they kind of wrap their head around that, then you're going to kind of take things a little easier and just kind of give them a little brief thing like, hey, here's what we're going to do. You know, again, you're going to take them through the questions. It's more about, you know, their plans and what they're looking to achieve than and if you can help them get there. And then after that, you'll give them the tour. They'll give you a tour of the property. Then you'll talk about marketing and again the decision and all that stuff, right? So the last time we went through all of the questions, which, you know, again, where are you moving? That could be a lengthy list of questions. Really, what you're looking to do again in the moving questions is to find out, you know, more about what their problem is and how you can help them, and really try to get back to emphasizing the product, which is you helping them sell their house for top dollar more than they could do any other way, and way better than any other agent because you know how to do it, right? Then you ask them about the questions about when, and so you can go back and listen to the first one. So it's about finding out the time of the listing that they are feeling comfortable with. Everybody starts out saying they're not in a hurry, which is a big fat lie. They are in a hurry. They'd sell it tomorrow for the right amount of money. And when they say that, they only basically mean they don't want to sell it at a loss, right? And the ironic thing is the longer it takes to sell the house, the bigger the loss they're going to take no matter what price they start at. The quicker it sells, the more money they're going to sell it for no matter how low you start out. So, and then the second part of when is for occupancy. It's a good way to kind of try and gauge and get a feel for what their what their needs are, in terms of moving out of the actual property. And of course, if you have a husband and a wife that you're doing this for, the husband thinking like 5 minutes, and the wife's thinking 5 months, and they need to agree on this. So it's a good way to get that answer out of them. And then we talk about the #1 guaranteed result they're looking for, which is just your way of reminding them again in the middle of all that stuff that your goal is to sell their house for more money than they could do any other way, right? That's the product that you were trying to sell. Then you go through the expired list again, only to try and, it's just a setup, an elaborate setup, so you can get them to tell you what they think agent would be doing wrong, so you know not to do that. You want to make them happy, right? The goal is to make them a raving fan, which you're going to ask them again to reiterate, in the second here, another elaborate setup for how did I make you that happy. And then a trial close, and at the end of that close, basically you're not worried if they say, hey, we want to think about it, we're going to, talk to maybe another agent, or depends on how much you think we can get for the house. It's just the first time you're asking them. The theory behind this is kind of like when you first go into a grocery, store, hardware store, something like that, right? And one of the sales associates asks you if they can help you, and you're always like, first instinct is no, I'm good, I'm all set. And then if you're wandering around aimlessly for like 30 minutes, somebody asks you again, and you're like, yep, I definitely need your help, right? So that's the idea. Is sometimes a lot of people, they won't say yes on the first time you're asking them, so ask them up front. You want to ask them a couple of times, but in a clever way where it doesn't sound like you're pressuring them, but it's like a normal progression in what you're doing. So at this point, you've taken the tour of the property, you've taken some notes. They took you, through the house from like the front door, how the buyer would come in. They've kind of told you a little bit about the house, what they love about it, what they're including and excluding. Obviously, I call it here, discuss the white elephants. If there's things that are just glaring about the house, obviously you definitely want to stop and address those, and make sure that, you want to make sure they know that you are caring, that you're noticing things about the property, and you want to make sure they're taken care of, right? And then afterwards, you're done with the tour of the property, and you come back, and the next thing to do is talk about, you and your brand and your marketing and what you're going to do, right? So this is where we're going to pick up here. And in this section here, what I've done, if you can recall, if we go back up top, when you start the very first part of your presentation, we have an expired list. And then we got a section where we're going to talk about the overview of what we're going to go through with the client. And after you do all that the questions and the tour, the very next slides you're going to go to are these ones here. And so you would lead in and say, okay, well, you got a great house here. I really appreciate the tour. Beautiful home. Thanks again for that. And I want to take a little bit of time and explain to you how I work, right? So obviously, I work for Logik Realty, and I don't know how much you know about our company, but the real reason that I chose Logik is that they do the best job of helping me find you that one buyer on planet Earth who's willing to pay more money for your house than anyone else in the whole world. And again, that's the goal, right? And I don't know how many thousands of dollars less your house would sell for, how many thousands you might lose if I was working for the second best brand, but it's not really worth it for me to find out. That's why I chose Logik, because you're worth it. Now, one thing that some people don't realize is not every real estate company or location, even of Logik, is created equal. So the Rochester side that I work with, they have a couple of extra technologies they invested in, some extra programs. And they did that because it helps make my job that much easier in helping me find you the world's best buyer. Again, that's going to pay you more money than anyone else ever will, and of course, that's the goal, right? So then we move on to the next slide. So a little segue, and we say, hey, when we do business with a buyer, it's going to be on a form like this. Now, this looks like a pretty simple fill-in-the-blank form, but this is kind of what keeps you out of trouble or gets you into trouble or court or something like that. So this is what we need to take very, very seriously. And by the way, this form, it's about 9 pages long, and in 9 pages of fine print, there's a ton of different opportunities for disputes between the buyer and the seller, but they always tend to seem to revolve around who's going to pay for something, right? So when people say, hey, it's about the principal thing, trust me, it's about the money, right? So here's something that we like to do to protect you. If I'm writing the offer myself, which is very unlikely, the great likelihood is that some other agent I've never met in my entire life who happens to have, again, the world's best buyer for your house, has already written me an offer by the time you and I even get to see it, right? And I'll be in the position of reviewing that and making sure that all the protections you should have are in there for you. And the likelihood is we might need to do a counteroffer. But either way, if I'm doing the counteroffer or the other agent's offer, or I'm writing the offer myself, I'm going to put in some magical words here. This is the seller agrees to pay the following costs and fees. And then we will itemize the name and the costs, the name of the costs and fees that you are agreeing to pay or you're required to pay given the circumstance. And then after that, I'll put in the magical words, buyers to pay all other costs and fees. That way, when my cell phone goes off and I'm on the freeway and the agent says, hey, who is going to pay for the appraisal or something like that, I'll just say, you know what, you can read the offer or the counteroffer, and it'll answer that question for you. And all the little disputes, those don't get cooking, and it keeps things a little friendlier, right? So the most important event in our whole process is going to be when I present you an offer. And here's how that's going to go. I'll be here, you'll be here. If you want someone advising you, that's fine. I'll definitely be advising you. And you know, the buyer agent might be here, doesn't happen as frequently as it used to, but they could be here. The buyer won't be here though. So anyways, we'll go through the offer, and then once you understand what it is the offer is and everything that it entails, you and I will go off into our little soundproof booth away from the buyer agent, and you and I are going to make a decision on what you want to do. Now, you will either want to accept the offer as it is, or perhaps do a counteroffer, which would be very likely. Now, if we do a counteroffer, that could be perceived as bad news to the buyer agent and ultimately to the buyer, right? But I'm a big believer there's no such thing as good news and bad news. There's just good and bad presentations of news. So what we want to make the buyer feel like they're winning the lottery lucky, even though we are jacking them back up to full price or over full price. Any questions on how that goes? Okay, great. So I would say 95% of the time nobody asks too many questions about the purchase agreement, especially when you kind of explain it like that. They kind of get the idea that you've got it covered. And then we flip here, we say, hey, when I present an offer to you, I'm also going to fill out a worksheet like this so you know what your estimated proceeds will be, and you can base your decisions on whether to accept or to do a counteroffer based on one number, and be rest assured that you're covered in the contract. So this section is important because, you know, if you present offers to the client and there's different terms in there, it could be the case that just because of the sale price, it doesn't mean the net is going to be higher, or sometimes maybe you just need a little bit higher of a purchase price maybe on one of the offers, in order to make something a little bit better or to just improve like an already great offer. So this is super important. Another trick you might want to do that I usually do is I just on a 3x5 card or something like that, just write down a summary of the offer, basically on, you know, and attach it with each purchase agreement and the net proceed sheet. That way I kind of know and have a basis for each one, and it's something really quick and easy to look at for both you and the actual seller. So moving on. So let's talk about marketing. Now obviously my company does the brand awareness media advertising, but all of the money, 100% of the money that realtors spend on advertising, me included, when we spend money on advertising, it's always in some form or style of classified advertising. It's always going to be in the newspaper, you know, the old newspapers like you see here, convenience store, picture books, home magazines, TV, radio, the web, Craigslist. You know, I could have a airplane fly a sign behind it. Anything where it says, you know, here's what this house is like, call Steve, right? This is all classified style advertising. Now I just want you to know that when I do that, it's 100% for my benefit. Okay, now I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and tell you that that's how houses sell. In fact, in this market, less than 1% of the houses that sell actually sell as a direct result of any form of classified style advertising. Okay? Now they may ask you some questions about that. If they have met with another agency, they may have given them, you know, some BS about how their company advertises on like 5,000 websites and we do drone photos and blah 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 blah, right? The truth of the matter is you can rest assured them that none of that stuff is actually helping the seller sell their home for more money. In fact, the more of that stuff they're doing, it actually hurts them, right? And that might be kind of difficult to understand, but that's just how it is. So all that stuff's fine and great. We have technology. It does all the same stuff. You can rest assured them that they're going to be all over the place in terms of being advertised. But we just don't lie to them about why we do that. And we do not lie to them that that's going to actually help them sell their house for more money, because it's all false. So we're not going to do it. So another thing you see real estate agents doing is holding open houses. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I appreciate the opportunity to hold your house open, but I do want you to know that if this was my own house for sale, there's no way in the world I would actually do an open house, because I don't want all the strangers traipsing through my house when I don't even know if they have money to buy it, right? Nosy neighbors, that kind of stuff. I think it's counter to the goal. Now that's what you say if you do not want to hold the house open. Maybe it's not in a great spot, maybe it's on a busy street, maybe it's under the power lines. Who knows, maybe it's winter and you just hate doing open houses in the winter, whatever the case. That's an easy way to kind of get out of the whole open house thing. In that case, when the client says, well, isn't that how you help sell the house? You can rest assured them that in the other previous section, you kind of basically indicated to them that less than 1% of any homes sell due to any direct marketing, including the open house, right? Truth of the fact is that 95% of the reason is because of the MLS, and 4% is due to the sign, and 1% of the reason why any house sells is because of any of the classified style ads or the actual open house, right? So now let's say you do want to do the open house and you're looking to get some buyers, or maybe try and convince some people who are going to be buying, who you know are going to need to sell their house first. and you want to try and book those as listing appointments. So you would say, you know, the other common thing you see real estate agents doing is open houses, and now I appreciate the opportunity to hold your house open if you would let me. And the other thing we do is we will inform your neighbors that your house is for sale, but we don't tell anybody what the asking price is until they actually ask us what the price is. But we will spread the word, and we would definitely appreciate the opportunity to hold your house open. Now we get down to flyers, because everybody wants to always know about what kind of crazy flyers that you're going to do for them, right? So in this section, let's talk a little bit about flyers. And 1 second, I have to go answer the door here. Just have to. All right, sorry about that. So let's talk about flyers. So we're going to flip over to this section of the slide, and we're going to say the other thing you see realtors doing is flyers. And I would say all advertising works. It either works for you or it works against you. And this is probably one of the best examples of that. The buyer comes up and pulls out the flyer that's on the sign, and they go, oh, it doesn't have a basement, or it doesn't have a pool, or whatever. And they put the flyer back in the box, and they never call the number on the sign. What was the purpose of the sign? Oh, that's right. It was to get them to call me. And if you think that's hilarious, the other thing that people do is that they will put these flyers in the house. Now imagine the buyer is in your house, right? And your house is in 3D right in front of their very eyes. And now they pick up this flyer and they go, oh, this house is only like 3,600 square feet. I thought this house is bigger than that. Here's the reality. Any information that we give a buyer before we've given them the chance to fall in love, they use that to weed us out. Now my job is to weed you in. By the way, my job is the job of a million little things like that. And now there's more than one right way to do every one of those million little things, but there's only one best way, okay? So in a nutshell, that's my philosophy in helping you get absolute top dollar for your house. Would you say that's definitely what you're looking for? Great. Now, if we can agree on a price, is it fair to say that we're going to get the ball rolling tonight? So this is our last. This is our second chance. Now we're trying to ask them basically if we can agree on the price here. Are you ready to get moving? Right. This is like us asking them basically. You know, now is your chance for you to make the most important decision, and that's to pick me as your agent, right? Now, if they don't answer yes to that question, we're not going to be talking price, right? If you're not the actual agent for them, it doesn't matter what you think of the price because they're not listing with you anyway, right? So you might as well just pack up your stuff and save your time and get out. That's the idea. There's no magical thing you could tell them basically at that point that's going to make them want to list their house with you, right? And besides that, it could be the case in a lot of times where it happens that if they're really pressuring you about the price, you could remind them that, you know, you could get an idea about the price, but if they're going to wait even 2 weeks, the market's very fluid. And so that could have a big impact on their pricing strategy. And it might be kind of getting ahead of the game to talk about the price when when they're not even ready to list, right? I mean, maybe it's 2 weeks, but you could exaggerate and say, hey, if it's 2 years from now, who cares what the price today is, right? I mean, you're going to sell it for something completely different at that point in time. And I don't think most sellers quite get that the pricing strategy is going to be completely different depending on whether it's today or 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years from now. Things are going to change, right? But let's say they decide to say, well, we want to think about it, right? Well, if you remember in the questions, and if this is your first time listening, you can go back and relook at this, but one of the things we do in the questions part is we trick them into telling us how quickly they're going to get the heck out of there if they actually were given an offer for the right amount of money, right? So you can say, well, you could try this. You have to be careful, but you could say something along the lines of, well, there's a couple things, but one of the things you can say to them is, well, I know for a fact you do not have to think about it, and do you know how I know that? And they might say, well, what do you mean? How do you know that? And you can say, well, literally like about 10 minutes ago, you told me for the right amount of money, you and your buddies would get all of your stuff out of here in about 5 days, right? Remember that? So I know you don't have to think about it. It's probably, just trying to delay maybe a really tough decision or something you've been thinking about. Moving isn't necessarily like the most glamorous thing that people want to jump into, but putting it off, if you knew putting it off even a couple of weeks could potentially cost you thousands of dollars, would you actually have to wait, and see what they say? A lot of times that can really get them over the hump because they're literally just trying to delay the decision to a different day, right? If that's not the case, and they say, well, no, it's not really about that. We definitely want to, talk to another agent. You're the first person that we've talked to. Then you can try and go to the last resort close, which I think we will do in another session because it's a little bit more involved, and I have some slides for that I want to present to you. So we will do that in another episode. And then another topic we're going to be doing in the future is about pricing and some ways to try and help lead the client into using a good strategy when it comes to pricing. And there's a whole presentation on that. That'll be a whole class all by itself. So we'll do that. And then in the end, after you go through the pricing, what you're going to do is give them a conservative estimate, right? So, and how we're going to do that, we'll go through that when we talk about the pricing. But basically, when we do the CMA, we're going to come up with a fair market value, and you can give them a range. But the safest bet is to use 88% of the fair market value, and then subtract whatever they owe on the property, and that will give you what their net's going to be. Now, that's right, so you're going to subtract 12% from what the sales price, the fair market value price is going to be. And the reason that we do that is the math kind of almost always works out to be around 89–90%. But you want to do that. It's a conservative way, especially if you're going to be trying to convince somebody to list with you at 7%. There's a bunch of other costs and fees and some hidden things that pop up, and if you give them something too high, they might be upset when they're not netting the right amount of money. So if you give them the conservative amount, for sure they'll be happy when they're going to make more than that, right? So, and you can tell them that. You can say, hey, conservatively, based on a fair market value of $200,000, for example. You're going to walk away with whatever, like $166,000. at the end of the day, or whatever 88% of that number is, and say, now, one thing I do know is that that number you should be able to make your plans on. I want you to feel confident in that. And the number could be higher, but it won't be lower, right? So, and if they ask you how you get to that, you can basically explain to them it's some simple mathematics, and again, once they do sell it, you'll be happy to give them a complete breakdown of all the numbers, but it's an easy way for us to estimate just based on the information that they told us at the moment what they're going to walk away with. So I hope that this is helpful to everybody when you're going through stuff. There's a lot of information that is behind this listing presentation and how to give it to your clients. And what you should know when you're doing this is that the client doesn't know the presentation at all, right? So it's quite extensive, and what you need to do is try and learn the entire thing. But if you don't know the whole thing, it's pretty powerful enough that you can kind of go through it, and even if you just are making some of the bullet points, make it your own, so to speak. You don't want it to sound like something memorized. You want it to sound like your own. That it's definitely going to help you be very professional and greatly increase the chances of you getting the listing. One of the other things I wanted to point out also is when you're doing business with somebody you know, friend, relative, maybe an acquaintance that you've met a couple of times, and somebody referred you, something like that, right? You either kind of know the person or you know them, and for whatever reason, when you kind of know somebody or know them, they don't see you as a professional, right? They see you as like a friend or something like that. So when you go to do a listing for them and you bring out a very professional presentation and you walk them through this, that is the way to make sure you're not skipping steps. That's the way to make sure that they know the same information. You want to make sure that they're being treated like a customer, and you're not just taking for granted that they're going to do business with you. And I think that's a key thing. I've done this several times for people that I do know, and I feel like they feel much more confident in what I'm doing when I can take them through this and not skipping the steps. Skipping the steps is only something that's going to hurt you. If somebody's fighting you along the way and they're not willing to kind of go through this, you can almost stop them and say, hey, I'm basically, I know how to sell houses. I know how to make sure that you're going to get top dollar. My concern is, I think you're going to hurt yourself, and you could be costing yourself tens of thousands of dollars by not being able to go through this with me, so that you understand how the most successful sellers go about selling their house and obtaining top dollar. It's very, very important, and I don't want to hurt you. So if there's a better time to reschedule or whatever the case may be, let's do that. But I don't want to rush you through this or get sidetracked and not be able to make sure that you know exactly how to get top dollar when we sell your house. So keep those things in mind. The next time we meet, we will either do the CMA or perhaps let's do the CMA, because then we can do the pricing presentation and it'll go together. So what I will do is I will pick a house that we did a listing on, or that we're going to be doing, and I will walk you through how we do the CMA so that we determine what fair market value is for the pricing strategy, because it's not just about the automatic versions of those, the online versions. They tend to miss some things. You can get a ballpark for it, but when you're doing it, you really want to try and focus on what the buyer in the market's telling you. And you can't do that using the automated tool, right? If you're looking at active listings to determine how you're going to be competitive, those automated programs don't give you as great of information that you need, and I'll explain that in detail in our next session here. So once again, thanks for joining us. Keep staying tuned. I will send you guys this out in an email, a link to the presentation, and we will see you guys next time.